Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartlidge, and I'm passionate about helping you master your animal training skills using the most positive and least intrusive approaches. Here at ATA, we understand that navigating the vast challenges you encounter in training requires a comprehensive base of knowledge and experience. It's common to face obstacles and rough patches on your journey that can leave you feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Therefore, since 2015, we've been on a mission to empower animal training geeks worldwide. We've aided thousands in developing their skills, expanding their knowledge, boosting their confidence, and maximizing their positive impact on all the animal and human learners they work with. We are excited to do the same for you. Simply visit www.atamember.com, join our vibrant community, and geek out with us. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy this free podcast episode as we explore new ways to help you supercharge your training skills, grow your knowledge, and build your confidence, so that you can craft a life that positively impacts every learner you encounter. But we will start today's episode where I'm thrilled to be having a conversation with Steve Goodall. Steve is a director of Packed Dogs Limited and an ABTC registered animal training instructor previously based in Southern Hampshire, now based in a small hamlet in Wales. Steve's been a professional trainer since 2010, prioritising welfare first, science-based and humane training methods. Together with his partner, Corin, he ran Goodall Dog Training. I realise that my bio is based off what's on the Packed website, but it needs a little bit of updating. He ran Goodall Dog Training, but now he lives in a small hamlet in Wales. But when he was running, and Corin and him were running Goodall Dog Training, it was a highly respected business. It helped hundreds of people understand and live better with their dogs through classes and private sessions. Steve's also a published author. He wrote Jack and Billy Puppy Tales, a family-orientated guide, co-written with his mentor Sally Bradbury and illustrated by Steve himself. The book has been well received by leading industry professionals. And combining his training knowledge with a passion for sound engineering, Steve also co-hosts the popular podcast Barks from the Bookshelf, as well as another podcast he has launched recently, which I'm sure we can talk about today. And Steve hosts webinars for major training organizations. He focuses heavily on the emotional relationship between dogs and owners, striving to foster happy, healthy homes through science. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Steve to the show today, who's patiently waiting by, as mentioned, in a small little hamlet in Wales on the other side of the planet. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to come and geek out with us at Animal Training Academy.
No, thank you. And you've actually reminded me that I have a note right here on my desk, which reads, need to update bio on the website. So that's a timely reminder. And if Nat listens to this, she'll be scolding me. I told him to do that. I was supposed to write something and give it to her. I think it was last week, probably a month ago, knowing the way that my brain works. But yeah, a lot of past tenses needed to be added to that because my life has changed a fair bit over the last couple of years, that's for sure.
I think the bio still represents the ripples that you've been making through the work that you've been doing. Just before we jump in, though, just a quick note for you, the listener. This is, if you've been listening to the show in a chronological order, you will notice that this is our third episode in a row where I've been lucky enough to have one of the four directors of PACT, aka the Professional Association of Canine Trainers, join me to share their stories. If you're interested, you can also check out the previous episodes with the wonderful Jason and Natalie Light on whatever app you're listening on. But additionally, don't worry if you don't have to listen to those episodes first to enjoy this one. Just sit back and enjoy this conversation that's about to unfold. Also, additionally, what I'm especially excited about is that in the following episodes of this, we're going to have all four directors on the show at the same time. Steve's wife, Corin, Steve, past guests, Jason and Natalie, and doing a deep dive into PACT and the amazing impact that it's bringing to our community and trainers across the United Kingdom and beyond. But for this one, it's all about my man, Steve. And Steve, I was hoping you could please take the listeners back to where you first learned about animal training, about positive reinforcement, and share with them some stories from your personal behavior odyssey, as we like to call it.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. It's a bit of a windy path, actually, which I'm sure a lot are. But my start, I guess, so my first passion in life really was drawing, was art, and then I got into music when I was a teenager, and from there on in, I just always thought my life would be in bands. So punk bands were my thing, DIY punk scene, yeah, I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. I was in a band called Stout, and we did all right. We were a touring band, not so great that we made any massive waves, but we had a lot of fun doing it. And there was an amazing scene in Southampton when I was younger, and it was a very kind of inclusive scene where everyone was rooting for each other, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time. Anyway, what happened was, as I was in the band, an ex-girlfriend of mine at the time really wanted to get a dog. And I'd grown up loving animals. I've always been a lover of animals, always been kind of interested in their behavior in certain ways as well. I was like one of those kids on holiday that was rescuing the bugs from the swimming pool, kind of thing, and setting up like little insect hospitals on the side of the swimming pool and just watching animals as much as I possibly could. But then the like music thing really hit me hard, and I kind of moved away from that. And anyway, this dog turned up in my life. I was kind of in it a little bit embarrassingly, I guess. I was the sort of guy that was like, yeah, we can get a dog, but I'm busy doing band stuff, so you're going to have to do the walking, the training, kind of trying to pass off all the responsibility on my then girlfriend. Anyway, this dog turns up, this little whirling dervish of a black and white dog. He was an English Springer Spaniel cross with a Dalmatian, and his name was Rocco. He was a rescue dog, and he was the most beautiful dog. He's still up there with one of the most beautiful dogs I think I've ever seen. People used to think he was a Munsterlander quite often. He's kind of had that sort of look, that sort of speckly, long-haired, spaniely kind of look. And I remember actually vividly the second I got into dog training, the actual second. I remember it as a real visceral memory. I remember this kind of light coming through the window. So my then girlfriend, she got into the training quite quickly, and she'd actually, by luck, I think, more than judgment, found herself with one of the better training schools that was in the South at the time, and the school was called Scallywags. And she'd really wanted to do agility. So she'd been doing training with Rocco, and they'd been getting on okay. And she brought some of this training home. And one of the things that she was training Rocco to do was target a Pringles lid, the potato chips, the crisps, as we'd say over here in the UK. Because for the contact work, they were using these little Pringle lids to make sure that the dogs would target them when they came off the A-frames and the seesaw, so they didn't jump straight off them. So she was doing this stuff with this little Pringle lid, and she had this thing in her hand that made a clicky sound, and she's there in the living room, and I'm kind of like eating my lunch, and I kind of come downstairs and I was watching them, and I'd already fallen head over heels in love with the dog. Who doesn't? These dogs arrive in our lives, and just straight away I was smitten. But she was doing this thing, which I now know is targeting, but he was running across the living room to go and touch this Pringles lid with his nose, like on cue. And I was watching this, and I was like, that is incredible. I kind of could grasp the concept of like a recall, for a dog. That was about as far as dog training went in terms of my brain. And I was watching them do this thing, and I just absolutely was astonished. And I remember the day like it was yesterday. And then of course I'm like, can I have a go at that? Can I have a go? What do you have to do? Show me what you got to do. I want to have a go. And anyway, the weeks went on, and I kind of gradually got kind of further and further into the kind of training side of it, and to the point where I think I was doing as much, maybe even a little bit more of the dog training. I was going to Scallywags, I was doing the agility stuff. Me and Steph, her name was, were sharing the kind of responsibility of the training a lot. And one day, this is about to take a bit of a turn, so a bit of a warning. But one day, we were so proud of everything, and he was great at agility. We were so proud. I got the training bug. We were going. Starting to understand the world of positive reinforcement and how to use clickers and agility training and all of this wonderful stuff. But one day, we were going for a private lesson over to Scallywags with Rocco, and I remember I invited my mum. I said, "Mum, come and have a look." I really like wanting to show off a bit of that validation we were maybe talking about earlier on that I much needed from my mother, perhaps. So my mum came along, and Corin was running Rocco around the agility course, and he went over the dog run, and he just flopped straight off of it. And I was looking over from the sideline, standing there with my mum, and I said, whoa, "What's going on? What's going on?" And I could see we were quite a distance away from him. I could see that Steph and Sally, who was the instructor, were starting to panic. So I legged it over there, picked him up. He was floppy at that point. There was a vet's literally about 2-minute drive from the training venue. Luckily, well, I say lucky enough, but there was a vet situated there. We took him there, but unfortunately, by the time he got there, he passed away. And what we found out was he had an underlying heart condition that we didn't know anything that and that was the moment, that took him. And it was to say it hit me hard was an understatement. It was really, really tough. And of course my mum was there, and obviously everyone was in tears, and it was just really, really tough. And I wasn't prepared for how tough it would be. Losing a dog is never ever easy. And whether you are prepared for it in terms of it's coming, or whether it happens as a shock, I don't know which is the easier way, if there is even an easier way. But I was taken aback by it. And so what followed seemed like weeks of heartache and mourning for this wonderful dog. I mean, he was just like, he's the sort of standard that I hold to every dog since, unfortunately, bless him. And of course I understand that they're all individuals, but I kind of he is the rose tinted glasses, sepia toned dog of my life. That dog, he was so amazing. Anyway, the school that we were training at, they sent us this huge bouquet of flowers, and they were really, really cool. And we got to know them and were quite friendly with them at this point. And they sent me an email saying something along the lines, I wish I still had it, but something along the lines of, so this, tragedy, because it was quite traumatic for Sally. Sally was the owner of the business as well when she was there. But so this tragedy doesn't go, without something coming out of it. We'd like to invite you to, maybe come and shadow. We know that you're really into the training, and so if you'd like to explore, becoming a dog trainer, that's something that we could offer you in light of what's happened. So yeah, I just went for it. I said, yeah, why not? And at the time, although I was in the band, the job I had was a postman. So what that meant back in those days was if you arrived early in the morning and threw up all your letters as quickly as possible and got out and you're around as soon as you can, you could finish as early as you finished. It was like job and finish kind of work, which meant that if you were quick, which I was like zippy at it, you could be home in the afternoon and have the entire afternoon to do with what you please. Tiring, but I was younger back in those days. So what I used to do is postie work, almost run around my round delivering all these letters, and then drive straight over to the training school, and then for the next 4 or 5 hours shadow their dog trainers. And this was back in the day of we had our own little forum, and I was known as Shadow Man on that forum, because I would just be kind of quietly in the background watching people do stuff with their dog training classes and just making notes. And then Sally eventually asked me to come and shadow at her puppy classes, which were in the evenings. And again, I was there for a few months at the back of the room, making notes and all the observations, and then sharing them with Sally. And then one day she said to me, "Oh, I'm giving up this puppy class, and I'm giving it up next week. Do you want it?" And I hadn't done, to that point, I hadn't done any kind of front-facing coaching or anything along those lines. And although I'd been in a band and we played like in front of, well, at that point we played in front of, we'd done gigs to like thousands of people at that point, but it had the idea of like, 6 expectant faces looking at you in a room with their dogs terrified me. But for some reason, I said yes. I turned up with this little briefcase to the classes the next week, and I had a script of what I had to do, and off I went. And that is the route that I got into dog training. So kind of what was a really, really big tragedy really like turned my life around. Like months before that, if anyone had said to me, you'll be a dog trainer, you'll get into animal training and behavior, you'll geek out about it, and then one day you'll be a director of a company that trains dog trainers, I would have laughed you out the room. I'd have been like, there's just no chance. But this kind of, the coming together of all of those things sort of led me to where I am today. I'm eternally grateful to Sally, because I think that baptism of fire, it's very unlike me to do that, by the way, which is kind of strange. Like mostly I'd kind of go, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I need to prep. I'm the sort of person who'd like to prep so much they miss a million opportunities, like kind of thing. But yeah, I did it. And that has led me here to talking to you today, I guess, in a weird way.
Well, firstly, before saying anything else, just sorry for that situation. That sounds incredibly traumatic.
It was. Yeah, it was. And thank you for saying that. I guess like at the time I was inwardly really, really tore up, but outwardly quite stoic because everyone around me was very outwardly emotional. But it was a life-defining moment, but such like I say, he was such a lovely soul, that dog. He was amazing. And just snatched immediately out of our lives pretty much. So it's hard to sort of like think back on those things and be like, how would my life panned out if he hadn't have died? If I hadn't have come down on that day and seen, Steph training, I'm sure there would have been other opportunities, but you kind of look back at all of these little pathways that go off and how our all the antecedent arrangements that have led us to being like where we are today. And you play back these things in your mind. I'm super, super grateful in a way for that experience, which is kind of odd in itself. But I think about it a lot, I must admit.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think about it often?
Yeah, it does. It comes up a lot. It does come up a lot, I think. But I think like all of those kind of traumatic events will play on your mind some ways. But like I say, I think it has a nice kind of a nice end result. Like if that training school, if Sally hadn't have reached out there, I would probably think about it in a much different, or maybe not think about it as much possibly, but it would be thought about in a much different way. Whereas, it does have that tinge of, out of that came opportunities that have led me to a career that I absolutely love. So I feel grateful in a weird way, if that makes any kind of sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, if Sally hadn't reached out, maybe you'd be traveling the world as Shadow Man in the gyms, rocking out.
I don't think we were ever that good, I'll be honest.
Grateful in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's making me think about what a definition, and I haven't unpacked this enough to say that I agree with it or don't agree with it, but a definition that someone offered the other day of gratitude being, and gratitude is a core value, one of our main core values at Animal Training Academy. So always embrace an opportunity to spend a moment talking about it. But the definition was gratitude is expectations met, or frustrations being expectations not met.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
So
yeah,
does
that makes
that fit
sense.
in?
That does make sense. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it? Because I don't know how to, like, I think like a lot of, I don't know if this is a general a generalization for men, and certainly men of maybe my age as well. I think we quite often don't like to think about the sort of feelings and stuff, and kind of like expose ourselves to that sort of thing. So it brings up emotions when you think about these things that maybe you try and sort of like pat down a little bit. But yeah, that it's always been something that's come up, and I thought out of that came some really lovely opportunities, but I would rather it hadn't have happened. Because I remember on the day it was really, really bad, and I never intended on a move away from music in any way. I thought, if anything, actually, I'd go into kind of music production, because that was another, and still is another kind of passion of mine. Anyone that sort of listens to my podcast, Barks on the Bookshelf, will know that I do a lot of the like little jingles and production things on there. And but yeah, like being a dog trainer, nope. But I actually think there's a link, I think, between the artistry side of it and dog training. And it's interesting now because, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but now that I am, training the next generation of dog trainers, or part of the training of the next generation of dog trainers, shall we say, I've kind of noticed that we're living in a well, our industry is full of artists. I see the art of it, like, before I see the kind of the science of it a lot of the time. And don't get me wrong, I love the science of it, but because I wasn't an academic growing up. I did okay at school, but I had no real interest in it. It's become later in my life that I've kind of gone back to learning about things like science and learning theory and all of these things that we love as dog trainers. And I have a real passion for that. And I had a period of my life where I was like seeking that stuff out and sucking it up as much as I can, which is difficult because, again, I came to it a little bit later maybe than a lot of people. But I think starting in a band, I see a lot of the art before I see the science, which kind of makes me look at things maybe a little bit differently. I don't know. I know I was chatting with Jennifer Zelig, who's been on your podcast before. She was a speaker at our Dog X conference last year, and we had a few chats about where the sort of art and science intersect with dog training, because I became very obsessed with trying to find out where it is. And a lot of people would say, I think the art of dog training is in the, how you set up the environment, for example, which I totally agree with. But then it gets more into sort of like the mechanics of it. That is kind of the art, is the mechanics of maybe how we move our bodies, which I completely agree with. But I also think there's an area of art which is about the communication, how we communicate with this other species that we might be working with. And we concentrate so much on the how, like how we do that we don't seem to think too much about the why. And when you're in a band, or whether you're an artist, whether you're a painter or anything, the most interesting thing about an artist isn't the sort of like how they do it. It's not like what brush they use. It's the why they're kind of doing it. And I think that's kind of affected my way of thinking about things from that day moving forward.
So what is the why?
I believe the why is all about communication. So how we can exist with another animal, how we can communicate to them that they are safe, how we can meet their needs, how we can make sure that their well-being and their welfare is met, how we can say for example, the cooperative care and things along those lines, how we can guide them towards feeling safe about something, like maybe something that they're scared of or worried about. I think this is where this is where the whys are for me. That's the thing that really interests me. That's the why I want to do it. And then of course you move into the how you're going to get into doing it in terms of methods and all of those sorts of things. But that's how I would kind of describe it. I think that's probably a little bit vague, but it's something there. It's something in the sky, that I can sort of grasp with my hand, but sometimes can't. And I think it's where the art and science sort of intersect and kind of dance with one another. And that's what I see when I watch. So one of the things I have to do with PACT a lot of the time is watch the homework submissions that people like submit in. And what I learn, and I always learn something from watching these, and these could be people that are just starting out, but it's the way that they approach something. So if they're approaching it with that kind of welfare friendly mindset, I think the way they set up the environment, the way they move their body in reaction to how the dog is moving, I think the way they use their voice, all of these kind of things. There's a brilliant word. Is it prosody? About how we can use how our vocalizations affect behavior. I think Patricia McConnell done her, I think it was her PhD on this, and it's a fascinating read to go and have a look at. But all of these kind of things that I'm sort of like looking out for and watching for, it's just endlessly fascinating. And I think that sort of like background in music and art has kind of amplified that side of it for me. As much as I do enjoy getting into the nitty gritty of the science as well.
So prosody, the patterns of rhythm and sound used in poetry.
Yeah, so you can use that in terms of, so if you think how like dogs will communicate. So I think there's been lots of studies. Patricia McConnell's is one of them, done on terms of like how you can calm another organism down that uses vocalizations maybe across the species divide, in terms of like lowering and calmer voices, or increasing that kind of like that sort of thing to excite, versus whoa to kind of like to calm down. And I think we do this instinctively as humans because we're quite vocal animals ourselves. But I think dogs, as well as other species, react really well to this because of how long they've kind of been intermingled with humans for tens and thousands of years. At least that's the theory that I'm working on. And I think it's something that you don't tend to sort of think about maybe as much when you're doing training. We're thinking about our timing and antecedent arrangements and all of these wonderful things that we should be thinking about. Of course, don't get me wrong, don't throw any of that stuff out at all. It's all very, very important, but it's those sort of like little instinctual things that have kind of been exciting me of late, and sort of things that I'm noticing when I'm watching people work. And this could be people, like I say, that are professionals already that are being assessed through PACT, or completely new people, and they seem to have these. I think people that are attracted to working with animals have that kind of artist spark, if you like. Quite often I see a creative, I don't know if artist is the right word I'm using, but creative spark about them that I think lends them to instinctually doing this kind of stuff. And I'm starting to see a few patterns. I mean, I watch hundreds of videos a week, and I'm starting to see patterns that like the really like good animal trainers, regardless of where they are in their journey, are the people that move their body in a certain way, or allow more space for the animal to come into, or use their voice in a certain way, and as well as on top of all of the other like wonderful things that we talk about when we talk about animal training. But it's an interesting topic to think about, and something I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Well, let's think about it more. I asked my mate Chazza.
Yeah.
People call him ChatGPT or here or they.
I see.
Proddy? I forget. Hang on. Let's circle back to that because I put the wrong word in.
Well, what did it come up with?
Well, I put proddy in, so it's not as irrelevant. But I think I really like this. So let's speak about it more, especially because you've been thinking about it a lot recently. It made me think about last weekend. I spent $400, £200, and I brought a smart scale so that it could measure my weight and my visceral fat to tell me the impact of my fasting and my exercise regime to try to lower my pre-diabetic marker in my blood results. And anyway, and I brought a little mat that slips under your mattress to tell you like what your sleep patterns are like, and to do with my sleep apnea. And anyway, the point of me telling you this is to say, like, I wanted the data. Like, I wanted the science and the data and the numbers to make decisions. But I'm sharing that because I see it as a perspective and a way of analyzing the world that is in contrast to what you're describing. And what I value in all areas of life is perspective and just hearing or thinking about or being offered something that is completely contradictory to how I'm seeing things. So that's why I'm saying let's unpack that a bit more, because it's really interesting to me to be like, how does, like, if me and Steve were to look at a training session, like how can it's like that picture of a an old lady and a young woman. Do you know the one I'm talking about? And it's like
Oh, and if you look at it a certain way, it's one thing.
you
If
can,
it's not, yep,
yeah,
I do. Yep, yep.
but some people can't see the old lady, and some people can't see the young woman. So like two people can look at the exact same thing, see something completely different, but like both be 100% correct. So
Yeah, I feel like I need to caveat this a little touch, because, like, I get super excited about things when I talk about things.
good,
Sometimes I do not in any way, in any stretch, say to, like, that anyone should pivot away from their understanding of, the mechanics of a training session, the protocols, or anything along those lines. And those things are all very, very valid and very, very important. I guess, yeah, and at the risk of sounding a little bit airy fairy and getting the patchouli oil out and dancing around a fire, I guess I was kind of trying to point to the fact that I think that background in art has sort of taught me to look at something from an artist's maybe perspective and see training maybe as well as all of those things going on. And I think we would see it exactly the same way. I don't think we'd see it from a completely different perspective, but also see the kind of dance that's going on as well in a training session, like the toing and the throwing and the communication, and then kind of trying to look at that through the lens of art as much as it is science, and where those two things interject. So yeah, I don't want to sort of like, be out here sort of like shouting down science or data for that matter. Although I did hear a really interesting story, and I don't know how true this is. So probably should have checked this. Probably should have asked your mate first. But I know when people wear the wearables, so I'm quite into sort of like health and fitness and stuff. When people wear the wearables that track sort of like your sleep and things, and I am, or at least I think I know, but I have read at some point, this is the great start to an anecdote, isn't it? That occasionally people, if you are told that you have not recovered well, or you've not had a bad sleep, they would then feel, like, I haven't recovered well, and not had a bad sleep. Whereas, and I've had a bad sleep, so therefore I am, tired during the day. Whereas if you don't know that stuff, perhaps that won't happen. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, maybe that's sometimes where data works against you, and it might be food for thought. I don't know. How's it work for you? Have you experienced anything like that? Sort of anxiety about, oh my God, my visceral fat is is bigger on a Tuesday than I wanted it to be, or however that might work.
no, yeah, I'm a biohacker, Steve.
Yeah, okay. You just want the data. Give me the data and I'll go with the data.
So what I mean by that is I have a history of prostate cancer in my family. So I get my prostate checked now that I'm 40 every 2 years. Part of that process is getting a blood test. Part of the blood test results have suggested, hey, there are some things going on inside your system that if we don't address them and they progress, they're going to cause issues for you later on, right? And so my why is my daughters. Like, the difference between like having daughters to live for and wanting to ensure that you're healthy for them versus, when I was young and didn't give a care about any of this stuff, it is quite different. So, within 2 weeks, I've changed a lot of my diet, and because I like energy. I don't know if I like energy, right? So I had this like hyper energetic breakfast, like porridge, oats with berries and banana, but that's really high in sugar. And so I've changed that, and then changed some other things. I now exercise after every meal, like just light walking. But like, I need to know if that's going to make an impact. Otherwise, I'm just wasting my time. You know what I mean? Like, so but I'm using data to kind of go for my daughters, but to measure the impact of the changes that I'm making in my life. With regards to the sleep, and you've asked if I experienced anything like that, And then I want to come back to like how you view job training, and I want to say a couple of things, especially something I like that you did this then. But we did some webinars last week, and they were free webinars, and then we sold some memberships after. One of them like didn't go very well in terms of like the sharing what ATA is about and getting some new members. One went really, really well. And the guy on our team, our marketer, is like, what was the difference? And I was like, I was just in flow one day, you know. And he's like, well,
Yeah.
can you replicate that? And I was like, yeah, just remove all domestic friction from my life and make sure that I get good sleep every night. but like I was talking to a past guest as well, and I'm like, yeah, you know, that podcast episode we recorded, yeah, I wasn't on that day, you know, like I was a bit sick, like my thoughts weren't working. And so what sleep data, and so I know a big difference in myself being a podcast host and a webinar host. That, and so you mentioned to me like the episode of Michael Shikashia, which is way back. Like I was in flow that day. Like I know that I was like top of my game.
Yeah.
You were gracious enough to have me on your show. Like I know that I was in flow that day. Like I was in top of my game. But I'm curious if there's a link between that vibe,
What the flow?
and what my sleep data tells me.
Yeah.
Like how much restorative sleep have I had, deep in REM, and how does that link into the vibe? Because I don't have like actual metrics on that I feel. And I'm curious because I think there's a link.
It makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense there'd be a link. Yeah.
Logically.
Yeah. But yeah, how are you gonna track that data? Very, very difficult, I guess. It becomes very anecdotal. Well,
I've got the data on my sleep. Like I've got multiple
Yeah.
devices that can help me measure that. Because anyway, this isn't about me, this is about you. What I like that you did there is one of our other core values at Animal Training Academy is just kind, compassionate, respectful communication, and we lean heavily on Crucial Conversations, which is a book, and they talk a lot about contrasting. So they talk about this is what I want, this is what I think, this is what I don't want. So you just modeled that really well for our audience. I didn't get the impression that you were suggesting that timing or anything was something that wasn't important. So just to reassure you that didn't come across. And even if you did, not that you did, but even if you did, no judgment here. Like I actually value those different perspectives because I get curious as to like why, how, what are you thinking? So thank you for modeling contrasting so well for our audience.
I'd like to say it was intentional.
Well, it was a bit of artistry. Maybe we can say that. I want to pull out one little thing that you said there, because and then talk about this prosody. Did I say that right? Prosody.
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 I believe it's pronounced. Yes.
And a couple of people come to mind as I ask you this next question. One is Leslie McDevitt and her work with pattern games, and how popular those games are and why they're so popular. Is it about the pattern? I'm sure. I think there's something about patterns, and then also a podcast episode I recently listened to with a guy called Anthony Robbins, Tony Robbins, and this guy called Stephen Bartlett, who's a podcast host.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah.
Yeah, you know the Diary of a CEO podcast.
Yep.
And so Stephen asked Tony, you know, what is a really important trait for people to be building in 2026 as we enter this new era of artificial intelligence and everything that's going to mean unknown for the world. And he said the ability and skill to notice patterns.
Right.
And then to be able to modify patterns and create whole new patterns. So you said there you see patterns. You watch videos and you're starting to see patterns. And I think that has a lot of value for the listeners of this show. It's like, what patterns are you seeing?
Yeah. So okay, let's kind of zoom in maybe on prosody a bit. I think that for me, it's people unconsciously sort of like playing with the way they use their voices. So if you think about it, I guess, dogs, coyotes, wolves, they are like famous for the sort of like vocalizations that they make, and how they respond to one another. And I think people that have spent that sort of time observing them kind of see that firsthand communication. And this is kind of when I went down a sort of rabbit hole of like thinking about this. It was Dr. Simone Gabois. Have you heard of him? Who was talking about it originally, that really like piqued my interest. And seeing sort of how sort of closely related our dogs are to wolves and other canids, obviously, it stands to reason that, or at least it does to me, I guess it stands to reason that we might be able to leverage that sort of skill in a way. So if you look at the kind of, I can't remember what you said the definition was there, but it's something along the lines of like rhythm, the way the patterns that we use our voice, the rhythms that we say it, and kind of like the complexity of that, maybe the longer drawn out notes or higher pitched notes in order to try and influence how dogs behave. And I think a lot of people do that when I'm watching these videos very instinctively. At least that's what I'm assuming. I haven't gathered the data on this, and I probably should. But when I first heard that concept and I kind of married it together with these patterns that I was seeing, it kind of spoke to me, and it seemed to make a lot of sense. And then I started seeing it more and more and more. So for homework videos where people were relying on more settled behaviors, like maybe let's take a settle, for example, whenever they were using their voice. And again, this might seem like really, really easy, but it's nothing that was instructed necessarily, but they would instinctively use their voice in a very calm, quiet way. Whereas if it's like Rico, it's like, gup, 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 and they're binging it up. And like I say, Susan Friedman's, I think it might have been a dissertation, PhD, I'm not sure, one of those things, but really went into this. And I guess that's the kind of artistry, because I think and I want to circle back to something you said actually a second ago, but that's the kind of artistry that I'm talking about, is people using the kind of instinctual stuff and playing with it in the moment that isn't maybe necessarily in the training plan that they've got laid out. And I guess that's the sort of patterns that I start to see. And then once you start to see it in those things, you start to see it in the way that people move their bodies. Now, again, this is a learnt behavior, I'm sure, but it's also seems quite instinctual in the moment to me. It's like you said it. It's like the flow state when you're in an amazing like training session and communication seems to be going wonderfully, and you're in that flow state. A lot of the what I would describe as the artistry is happening instinctively and kind of in spite of everything else in a weird kind of way. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers your question as such, but what I wanted to circle back to is that you were talking about, why you're, the reason that you have these wearables and your bed and all of those things. And you said that the why is for your kids. I guess that's kind of like what I'm talking about. That's the emotional side of it, isn't it? Like that is the emotions that are informing your decisions to gather the data to then kind of how you're going to live your life going forward, which is very, very admirable, by the way. But it's, I guess that's kind of linked in a way. It's kind of the kind of emotional side of it, the joy of the communicating. Like we can be motivated maybe by emotions that might worry us to do things like change our diet, do more exercise, all of these things. But we can also be motivated and heavily reinforced by the joy of the moment, and maybe not even understand how we're being reinforced in that training session because we're focusing so much on what we're doing in terms of the science of it. We're not seeing maybe some of those other things that are a bit more dancey. Does that make sense? I'm not sure.
You mean Patricia McConnell's PhD, not Susan Friedman's?
Oh yes, sorry, misspoke.
That's right. Just checking. It does make sense. And firstly, before I explain why it makes sense to me, I just want to share with ChatGPT. Cheza. Hey Cheza. Cheza says, prosody refers to the rhythm, tone, pitch, and emotional quality of our voice when we speak. In dog training, prosody matters because dogs are highly sensitive to vocal tone and often respond more to how we say something than the specific words we use. A higher pitched upbeat tone can signal encouragement or play, while a lower or sharper tone may signal seriousness or interruption. Trainers can use prosody intentionally to help communicate clearly with dogs and support learning. And it's not something that I think much about. We've done a podcast episode with a guy called James Henderson, one of our members who lives in New York, who, when you watch him train with his clouder, his cats, he uses all of these different like tones and it's makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the trainers at Scallywags, where I first started, Don, Sally's husband, dogs loved him. They would gravitate to, or they would cross 3 fields to go and see Don. And I swear to God, it was about his voice. His voice. He was like a proper builder guy by trade, like sort of thing. And he was a man's man, like a hardworking guy. But when it came to dogs, his voice was like, oh, I know what it was like. But whatever it was about the tone of his voice, for dogs, it was so inviting. He was like a magnet. And obviously that's reinforced by all the things that happen after the voice encourages the dogs in on, and all of these sorts of things. But, I think we don't think about it, but that's what I'm kind of saying. It's like, it's for me that as well as the other thing, I feel like I'm caveating a lot here, which I don't need to, I know I don't need to do, but it's like, it's my habits. But as well as all of the good stuff, like the science, the timing, the mechanics, all of those things as well that have to be in place. I think there are certain types of dog training that we do, maybe as an offshoot of our evolution or co-evolution with this amazing species, that we're not so aware that we're doing, and they're just part of this kind of flow state. And I notice it in absolute beginners. I notice it in experts. And I think the people that it can maybe become aware of it and leverage these kind of things. You think about, I'm not very familiar with the sports world of dog training, but one of the things that these people do that is incredible is the way they move their bodies. A slight little drop of the shoulder that a collie will see as they're turning a corner will indicate we're going in this direction, and obviously there's verbal cues that are involved in that as well. But I would bet that the body language is as much a part, if not more, than the verbal cue that's coming out when someone's yelling right, on an agility course or something along those lines. And it's just something that I've been interested in. And a bit of a tangent in terms of what I was thinking about before. But I think that my background in art and music and creativeness has kind of enabled me to pick up on those sorts of things. And it's a real privilege to watch people. I feel so, we spoke a lot about imposter syndrome, didn't we, on my podcast? And I just love, and I know you do as well, and this is one of the reasons that I think the Animal Training Academy is so wonderful, is that how much it looks after its members and how much value you give your members, but also how much you're an advocate for them, and when you have this responsibility of these people like that are not hanging off your every word, but that have come to you for knowledge and to be assessed or whatever, however you're interacting with people, it's really humbling. And it really, I feel this massive weight of responsibility of trying to look after people and foster their learning. And I think the Animal Training Academy does that really, really well.
Well, I appreciate the pivot and that's how you ended the answer to that question, because it's a wonderful end of the answer to your question. So thank you. That's really kind of you to say, and love our community of Academy members and also just our wider community who follow ATA. And I just want to go back to one thing you shared in talking about prosody and how we can use this, and just thinking about a relationship in my life where there was frustration on my end because of unmet expectations. And I started to think a little bit about motivators for and I have no data on this. It's all just kind of like my thoughts. And then it comes back to dog training, because I think there's different strengths that people have and how they can use and leverage those strengths. For me, one of my strengths is the future thinking. Like my mind's in the future, and like I can really clearly like envision like future things and kind of create and then work towards creating that future. However, if I speak to somebody who doesn't have that skill or strength, like I very easily lose them, i.e.,
Okay.
my wife. And so it was really like eye-opening to kind of like acknowledge that, and I did that via a strength finding skill online called Gallup's. Anyone can do it. It was recommended to me by a mentor. Was quite revealing and eye-opening. But then also in this relationship, I realized that I'm a very systems-led operator. So what I mean by that is like I'm motivated by systems. Like we need to do this thing now, regardless of how we feel about it, because it's the system and it runs a stadium, and whether that stadium's our house, our business, our life outside of that. And like I will do whatever is required from the system to keep things flowing and setting up systems. Whilst this person that I'm thinking about, like that they are a state-led operator, like they will be motivated in the present moment by how they're feeling.
Right. Okay.
And can you see how those two things would clash?
Yeah, I would probably maybe find myself in the latter
The
of those
system,
two.
the state-led operator.
Yeah.
Which is what I was thinking as you were talking. I'm like, because that's what I'm saying. Like I really value the different perspectives, because we're both looking at the same things and we're both seeing something different, yet we're both looking at the same thing.
Yeah,
Both
and
things
likely
are true at the same time.
potentially likely to get the same outcomes as well, which is also another interesting way of looking at something.
The same outcomes, but additionally, like I think you said, like people can leverage this, and I think one thing that this conversation is making me think about is if you find out who you are and what your strengths are, then whether you, like for me it's probably I don't think it's a strength of mine. Like I'm so systems driven that I can come across as rude because I'm not acknowledging the state in the present moment, because I'm so like making sure the system stays operating.
Right. At all costs?
Not at all costs, because the intent and how things are perceived is different. So like I could be perceived as not being caring enough, but that doesn't mean that I don't care enough.
Right.
Like, and the reason that I'm keeping the system afloat is because I care so much. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think with dog training, like how it comes back to all this dog training stuff is like, I think, you've kind of validated my thoughts. And so for dog trainers and for the listeners here, like maybe there's a little bit of value in thinking like, who are you? Like, are you a system-led operator who like, I really value like, what is the reinforcement system here? Like what happens every single moment in this training session? Where are your hands? Where are your reinforcer? Does your learner know what to do to get the reinforcer? Do they need to know what's after? Let's break that down. Let's pull that apart. Let's fix these things up and let's jump back in. Because if you get that system right, then the training is going to flow beautifully. Right.
Yep.
And then I'm very much looking at a training session going like, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And there's like a flow chart, thanks David Bertelsen and Emily Johnson Bay, like forming in my brain. Right. And I'm like let's map that out on a piece of paper. And so what you're going to do at every different decision point in your training.
Which I get that. And it's kind of the way that I work as well. I think, I don't know, I think I'm learning to loosen up my grip a little bit on some of that stuff and kind of enjoy the moment a bit more, maybe. I don't know.
I think it's a good thing though.
It maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think I get good outcomes, out of it. And I think to go back to a music analogy, right? One of the wonderful things about learning a musical instrument, okay, is that, especially if you're into the sort of like stuff that I was into, is like experimentally kind of punk stuff. It's like you learn an instrument, like maybe when you're a kid, like from my example, this is an example for me personally. So you learn an instrument and you learn chords and you learn where the notes are and I didn't learn sort of how to read music, but I learned what was called tablature and things like that. So I'd learn songs, and you'd cover your favorite songs, and you would like cover, and you'd learn how it all goes. And at some point you get proficient enough. I'd say proficient enough, not an expert, not a virtuoso in any stretch of the imagination, but proficient enough to kind of do away with all of the rules, like the scales and things that you've learned and all of that stuff, and to play around with it a little bit. And within that playing around with it a little bit comes the creativity. And now I'm not suggesting that, again, I feel like I have to caveat this because I have a strong love for the science and training plans and all of those things that go along with it. I'm not suggesting we throw it all out, but that playfulness sometimes is happening when, and you're not knowing that it's happening. And if you can embrace the knowledge that those things are happening, so like prosody is a great start for that. Like, how are we leveraging our voice? How is my voice affecting this? Maybe though, actually, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about this. And maybe when you start to notice it, it moves maybe out of that creativeness a little bit more into the sort of like science and data side of it. But yeah, that kind of analogy kind of strikes me as true, you know, playing around with it a little bit more, like loosening your grip on all of these things that you've learned. Not to say that they are not valuable, because they are valuable. These things, you know, these things are facts, you know, that we've learned about learning theory and how all of this stuff works, of course. But the playful, I mean, look, shouldn't all training be kind of approached as a game in a playful way? We know how much, you know, being playful affects learning, how much being stressed hinders learning, you know, and yeah, I want to encourage that in trainers. I want to point those things out, because it's easy to say, yeah, your timing was great at this point. And of course, when I'm feeding back on people's homework, I point all of those things out. Your training plan was brilliant. You raised criteria at the right moment. You lowered criteria at the right moment. That marker point was spot on. Well done. But also I want to point out those things. Did you notice how you moved your body there? Did you notice that, you know, the beautiful thing about videos, and this is why I encourage all trainers to film themselves and watch them back, is you can look and at 3 minutes, 12 seconds, you dropped your shoulder slightly, or you moved back slightly. And these might not be things you intentionally done, but if someone points them out to you, you might go, oh, do you know what? Actually, I am pretty good at moving my body around. I never even noticed that before. And maybe that breeds a bit more confidence in someone. And maybe that, you know, that inspires someone to do more, or look down that road a little bit more. And I think when I'm talking about the art of it, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm trying to put into words here, and kind of managing it, I think.
Well, I think you should explore it. And the reason why I tell you that I think it's a good thing is because I'd be really curious if you did a Gallup Strength Finder test, and it costs about $30. You do it online, and like what your strength is, because if you find that like a state-led operator types, there's like 30 different skills, and you kind of get like, and it's, you know, as scientific as it is scientific. I found it valuable to kind of just explore those areas, but the idea is you find out what your strengths are, and then you invest your time playing to those strengths rather than playing to your weaknesses. So if you're somebody who isn't systems led, that's not right or wrong, but if it's not a strength of yours, then you might just find more joy in life or be more impactful if you know what your strengths are, and then figure out how everything fits into that with regards to what you're offering. So it sounds to me like for you, that could potentially be a strength, whatever strength is related to the things we've been talking about. And that's why I say I think it's a good thing to be like, because keep practicing your great contrasting and ensuring, and you know, I want to say the same. Like, I'm not saying Steve shouldn't adhere to the science, because I don't advocate for that, but I think you can bring something that is what Steve Goodall can bring and others can't.
Yeah, and I guess the beauty of it as well is, the more you look into it, the more you will find it is, you know, you'll be gathering data on it, and then, you know, these things will become a science event. I mean, look, what science is, the study of nature, isn't it? So, you know, nature is just there. It doesn't care about us. It doesn't care necessarily about what we're doing. You know, it's there to be observed, and then to try and take that observation and put into some sort of like explanation about why things work. and it all falls into the brackets of science. Maybe it all falls into both brackets. And maybe that's why it intrigues me so much. Maybe that's what it is. And like I said, I've had some, if people are interested in this, we've had I've had a lot of conversations with Jennifer Zelligs about this. So if you want to go and check out her episodes on the Barks on the Bookshelf podcast, or indeed she talked a lot about the art of training at DogX last year as well. But maybe that's why it interests me so much, because maybe you can't pull the two apart. Maybe it's all the same thing. Maybe it's all just the study of nature and creativity and science, and it's all one massive, glorious ball. And we're all at different sides of that ball, looking at different areas of it and trying to come together. And you bring up a good point about skills, because that's something with Impact. I know we discussed this a little bit before the podcast goes, but with Impact, my organization, there are 4 of us, and we all have distinctly different skills, and we do our best to try and play to those skills. And I feel quite often like I'm getting away with it, because my skill is kind of like in the creative side of things, and and that's where I like to put my energy and where I see the best results. Whereas, like we talked about this before, Jay, who's my business partner, another director of Impact, he is all about the spreadsheets and the data and and gathering it and seeing, measuring things so things can be improved, so we get it better next time. Whereas I'm sort of like la la la, walking through life and with the sun shining behind me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be into spreadsheets, but it's just not my thing. So it's interesting what you're saying. I think. It would be interesting to sort of find out if that's something that is kind of in me in terms of a state that I live in. I wonder what my kind of early experiences were that sort of led to that.
I reckon you should do Gallup as a team to find out what your strengths are.
I must say, we've done something similar. And I'm not sure if it is Gallup. I'm not sure if it was, because it was sort of mediated by someone, but we did do something to sort of find out where, and we ended up with a sort of like a round graph, sort of like, sort of representation of like, here's where your strengths are, here's where your strengths are. And that kind of led us to that sort of thinking. So maybe it's a similar thing, but I can't remember it being called a Gallup thing, but yeah.
It's the listener of the show, if you've listened to the last 3 episodes, I think it have picked up on what Steve just put down. We talked a lot about spreadsheets and data and business and stuff with Jay, and with Nat we talked about skills, and we talked about validation with Nat and doing different certifications and what they bring, and her views in this episode has been a delight, an unexpected delight, talking about prosody and something that I hadn't really thought about. But also why it's been a delight, Steve, is because it's given this new perspective on training and how people train, and as a coach and as an instructor as well, to help me think about how to best help the learners that I'm working with, the human learners, in terms of like, do they need systems, or are systems going to be getting in the way of this individual learner? I don't know how, and that's why I say I like perception so much and hearing different perceptions, because my immediate thought is I can only see the old lady. I can only see systems, and that's how I teach, and that's how it makes sense to me to become a better teacher. Like, you've got to understand the different perspectives so that you can pivot your style, as uncomfortable as it is.
I mean, the art of, the art and science, let's say, of teaching is a whole world, isn't it? And being able to sort of like adapt your skills to meet the needs of so many different learners out there, and how different people take in information, even from a, like, not talking out from a pack perspective, but as a dog trainer, I think so many dog trainers out there kind of have this sort of like, I finish my session, I send my notes, and maybe I send my notes and they are bullet points or whatever. And that's what I do. This is me. That's how I do my business. But so many different people would maybe appreciate, video notes, or being able, you come across people who want to be shown how to do it. Show me, here's my dog, show me how to do it. I know there was a big thing a while ago about like, never do a demo with a dog because, all X, Y, Z. And there's some valid points as to why not to do a demo with a dog. But some people are like, please show me. And as long as that's appropriate and that's how a learner wants to learn, wonderful. Show that person how to do it with their dog, and they can watch, and they're visual learners. Other people are like, I want to do it. I want you to describe it to me, and then I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it in front of you, and then tell me whether I've done it right, or point out things as I'm doing it. Other people are like, I'm going to take this in, I'm going to record this, I'm going to watch it when I'm at home. I would also like you to write notes in the form of War and Peace. And I want every like little detail. That's something, I'll be honest, that's something that Nat is really, really good at in terms of catering for different learning styles, and something I'm still very much a student. There's a wonderful book Chirag Patel gave me a heads up about this book. I've got it here. I can't remember what it's called. It's a whopper of a book, but I recommend it to everyone. Behavior Analysis for Effective Teaching, Julie S. Vargas, who is Skinner's daughter, I believe, isn't she? It's so brilliant. It's such a brilliant book. But in terms of opening the worlds of sort of like how you can use behavior analysis for effective teaching, it is just an iceberg of wonderful, wonderful things. So for people that are interested in coaching and teaching, that's definitely a book that I would recommend.
Amazing. I hadn't heard that one. Thank you for sharing. We have reached just over an hour, I think. So let's head towards succinctly wrapping this up. I think that was a really valuable conversation. I always feel like a knob saying this, but like, yeah, it's changed my life because I hadn't thought about some of these things before, and now I will from this day forward. So, maybe they are small hinges, but I think they're going to swing some pretty big doors in terms of like how my thinking continues to evolve here. So thank you for sharing everything that you've shared with us today, Steve, and showing up and being Steve Goodall.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And on a kind of personal note, I've listened to this podcast for years, and the idea that you would have gone back and told younger me that one day I'd be chatting to you, and we'd even be able to call ourselves mates. It's just it's mind blowing for me. You don't understand what it means for me to come onto here. So many wonderful episodes, so many. You talk about thinking about things differently. There's not an episode that comes out of this podcast where you don't leave it. Maybe that's why you feel like a knob saying it, but the way that you interview people, the guests you have on, the topics that you talk about, like I had no idea we'd be talking about prosody on this when we started this conversation. But yeah, it's and I'm by far not the most knowledgeable person in the world on it by a long stretch, but yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I love what you do. I love the ATA. We have a lot of sort of crossovers in terms of members with PACT and the ATA, and long may it continue, mate. You're a gem.
No, thank you. I feel the same, and enjoying this budding bromance, Steve. Talking about organisations, I would hate to have missed the opportunity to share a little bit about PACT, and if you could tell the listeners that information and where they can go to find you guys online.
Yeah, so PACT, which stands for the Professional Association of Canine Trainers. We train dog trainers, basically, is what we do. We also have we train dog trainers to the ABTC ATI standard. We also I have an ABT course as well, which is an animal behavior technician course as well. You can find us at pact-dogs.com. There's a little bit on there about what we do, how we do it. There's a section on there about with a load of blogs that we've written. I think there's one actually on prosody. One of the blogs on there is there. Come along, say hello, listen to our podcast, and drop us an email. We're always interested in hearing from amazing animal trainers out there.
And you're primarily focused on trainers in United Kingdom?
Well, we are branching out across the globe. So we recently got our first American member. Do you know Melissa McHugh-McGrath?
Mm-hmm.
Triple M, as she's known in the business. You should have her on the podcast, actually. She's absolutely incredible, and she's just done some amazing things with scent work and invasive species that are well worth talking about. But she's become a pack member recently, and we're very, very proud to have her. And we have others in other areas of the world as well. So yeah, we are tentatively branching out. But because we're associated with the ABTC, obviously, that's something that we have to consider in terms of people that are in other countries and insurances and all of that.
Bloody insurance. All right, well, we'll link to all of that in the show notes. Let's try and find your blog and link it in there. From behalf of Phoebe Dog here, who you can see on camera, Steve, and listeners, just take my word for it that she's here going, oh, you're cueing me that you're about to wrap up. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy, and looking forward to connecting with you and the rest of the gang again on our concluding episode for this packed series.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much for listening as well. This is your host, Ryan Cartlidge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. We hope today's conversation inspired you and equipped you with new tools for your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every challenge in training is an opportunity to learn and sharpen your animal training geekery. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to join our supportive membership, where you will find a community of trainers just like you. Together, we're making a huge positive difference in the lives of animal and human learners worldwide. Until next time, keep honing your skills, stay awesome, and remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.